Hey guys, welcome back. Part 2 here. TJ here with Dead History. I am here today with Henry.
Hello.
And we are back for part 2, like I just said, our next presidential series installment. This is looking at the 21st President of the United States, Chester Alan Arthur. This is part 2 of our Chester Arthur video. So let's get right into it. We're basically going to cover his presidency and his death and that sort of thing. And yes, in part 1, as you guys probably saw a little correction, I mispronounced his middle name. It was actually pronounced Chester Alan Arthur.
Not Chester Allen.
No, it's not Chester Allen. It's not Chester Alan. It's Chester Alan. Alan. So that is the correct pronunciation. So Chester Arthur, he was actually the first president to take an oath of the presidency in a president's home. He was the first president to take the oath of office in his own home. He actually took the oath twice. The first time was at his personal residence in New York City, where it was given to him just after midnight on September 20th, hours after President Garfield had died. Arthur took the oath again 2 days later after returning to Washington. The second oath was performed to clear up any dispute over whether the first oath was official, since it was administered by a state, not a federal official. So pretty interesting stuff there. State official means like the state you live in, and federal official means like the federal government that overlooks all of the United States. President Arthur, actually, he made no inaugural address. Yep, he did not have an inaugural address because he took over as president when...
had one planned.
Exactly. He took over as president when Garfield was assassinated, so there was no inaugural address for Chester Arthur. You know, and just to kind of get into it, after James Garfield's long, lingering death, his vice president, 51-year-old Chester Arthur, took over. But he was no one's first choice for the office. He had not been a congressman. He had not been a senator. He had been a member of the spoil system. He was a low politician by anybody's idea of it. And the idea that this man would ascend to the presidency, the American public had a sense of revulsion. Ascend means you rise to the top. So no one expected him to be anything other than either corrupt in office or completely ineffective. It is true that very little actually went on in his presidency, just as not much had gone on in the presidency of Rutherford B. Hayes, as we touched on when we did our Rutherford B. Hayes video. Not a whole lot happened in Chester Arthur's 4 years as president. There really isn't too much to talk about. I'm going to get into a few things here, but there's not much. Chester Arthur's main contribution as the 21st president was giving the White House a much-needed overhaul. When Mary Lincoln had taken over in 1861, she had spent extravagantly to try and bring the White House new furnishings, curtains, draperies, rugs, furniture. But by the early 1880s, the White House again was in disrepair. The building was so decrepit that Arthur originally wanted to tear it down and start from scratch. But when that idea met with resistance from Congress, Arthur settled for renovations. There was new plumbing throughout, the first presidential elevator, and a new sense of style for the mansion. You know, Chester Arthur, he just didn't have much zeal or energy except for hunting and fishing and fancy dinners. That's really kind of the truth of the matter. It just wasn't exactly a very memorable presidency. Just kind of the way it went with Chester Arthur. Chester Arthur actually requested standardized time. At the request of President Arthur, the International Meridian Conference was held in Washington, D.C. in October of 1884 to determine the prime meridian of the world. the conference established the Greenwich Meridian and International Standardized Time, which are both still recognized today. So there you go. There's one little fun fact about Chester Arthur. Interesting little fact. Like I said, there's not much to talk about when it came to his presidency. Another thing, controversy seemed to follow Chester Arthur. When his predecessor's assassin, obviously James Garfield's assassin, Charles Guiteau, celebrated success by shouting, "I'm a stalwart of the stalwarts. Arthur is president now." It sparked talk that maybe Arthur's people had actually hired the assassin themselves. Garfield lingered for months after he was shot, and Chester Arthur kept a low profile to avoid further suspicion. So a little interesting fact there about Arthur. Chester Arthur was in the habit of staying up until at least 2 a.m. every night. And he was very frequently seen having late-night strolls. Chester Arthur liked to take friends on late-night walks around Washington, D.C., sometimes as late as 3 or 4 in the morning. It was rare for him to be in bed before 2 a.m. Pretty crazy, pretty interesting stuff. The hardest job in the world and the, busiest man in the world, he stayed up very, very late.
Until 2 o'clock.
Minimum 2 o'clock, sometimes much later than that. Chester Arthur, as I touched on, did a lot of renovations with the White House, and Chester Arthur may have held the first ever White House yard sale. But instead of finding stained silverware and ratty stuffed animals on the cheap, bargain hunters would have found an old pair of Abraham Lincoln's pants and one of John Quincy Adams' hats. Chester Arthur practically sold anything in the White House that wasn't nailed down. 24 wagon loads worth of stuff to raise money for new furniture. Yeah. Chester Arthur put the White House furniture up for auction. So after James Garfield's death, Chester Arthur did not immediately move into the White House. As I already touched on, he insisted it be redecorated and had 24 wagon loads of furniture hauled off and sold at public auction. The pieces included some dating back to John Adams' term and would be considered priceless today. So, pretty crazy that you could have bought these things at public auction back then.
Did he? Did he buy them?
No, he put them up. He's the one that sent them out. You could have. Like, if we were alive back then, we could have went to the public auction and we could have bought this stuff.
Really?
Yeah. Chester Arthur, he needed the money, from the auctions and the yard sale and everything, because Chester Arthur then hired Louis Comfort Tiffany to redecorate and furnish the White House. One of Chester Arthur's lasting legacies as president was bringing Louis Comfort Tiffany to the attention of the world. This was before Tiffany became Tiffany. So yeah.
What does that mean?
Tiffany is a very famous company, very well known for their very expensive high-end jewelry and stuff.
What do you mean by Tiffany even before?
So this man that started the company, Tiffany, he was not even well known yet. Chester Arthur used him to help redecorate the White House. So it was before he even had the company, Tiffany. As I touched on, Chester Arthur had no vice president for his entire 4-year term. Yeah. Chester Arthur briefly served as President James Garfield's vice president, and after Garfield's death, Chester Arthur became president, leaving the vice president office vacant for all 4 years he was there. He was the very first president to have a personal valet, probably due in part to the next fact, which is Chester Arthur owned at least 80 pairs of pants. I told you guys that in part 1 briefly.
How many shoes?
I don't know. Which, 80 pairs of pants, which may not be a lot by today's presidential standards, but it was quite the extravagance back then. So, pretty interesting stuff. I found that kind of funny. The nation really, they had little interest in a second Chester Arthur term, and neither did he, to be honest. Falling ill from a failing kidney, Chester Arthur put no effort into getting renominated. Chester Arthur destroyed his records After spending the summer in Connecticut, Chester Arthur returned home very ill, and on November 16th of 1886, he ordered the burning of nearly all his personal and official papers. He died 2 days later as the result of a cerebral hemorrhage. So, pretty interesting stuff that he had all of his records and that sort of thing burned. I found that very interesting, to be honest with you. Only 2 days before he died. So another really fun fact, I'm going to show you some pictures here on the screen. Chester Arthur's sister, her name was Mary Arthur McElroy. She actually basically was acting first lady. In November of 1880, Chester Arthur was elected vice president. Of course, as I said, in July of 1881, James Garfield was fatally wounded, and Chester Arthur succeeded him as president. And Chester Arthur asked his sister Mary to care. He asked for his sister Mary to care for his younger daughter Ellen and act as mistress of the White House. Because she had her own family in Albany, McElroy lived in Washington, D.C., only during the busy winter social season. Although Chester Arthur never officially granted her the protocol of a formal position, she proved to be a popular and competent hostess. The procedures she and her brother developed for the social functions were used by future First Ladies for decades. Mary McElroy presided over a number of events and honored former First Ladies Julia Tyler and Harriet Lane, James Buchanan's niece and social hostess, by asking them to help her receive guests at the White House. McElroy's oldest daughter, May, and Arthur's daughter, Nell, often assisted. Mary's final reception took place on February 28th of 1885, 1 week before the end of Chester Arthur's administration. 3,000 people attended, including Adolphus Greeley, and 48 daughters of officials and of the social elite assisted her. Yep, Mary McElroy and her husband were supportive of civil rights for African Americans and hosted Booker T. Washington at their home in Albany in June of 1900. She was a member of the Albany Association opposed to women's suffrage. So she was very, very much for civil rights. And interestingly enough, the pictures you've been seeing are not only pictures of Mary McElroy, Chester Arthur's sister, but they're also pictures of her gravesite. Yes, I went and visited her gravesite at the Albany Rural Cemetery. It's the same cemetery that Chester Arthur is buried at. It's just outside the city of Albany. It's actually in I believe it's pronounced Menands, New York. So it's just outside the city. I believe it's called Menands. I'm not exactly sure. I know it's a weird pronunciation, but it's Menands is the actual spelling of it. Albany Rural Cemetery. This is her gravesite there. So she was the acting first lady for his entire term. So it's pretty cool. I found it interesting. I found that out, and of course I went and visited her gravesite. So that is what you've been seeing here on your screen. So I did want to add one thing in that I did not add in earlier regarding Chester Arthur's presidency. It would have been very ignorant and wrong of me not to mention the Chinese Exclusion Act because that was definitely probably his only big act that he signed into law while he was in office. So I'm going to just read you a couple quick things here. Scant weeks after Arthur came into office, former Senator Conkling met with the new president to express his wishes for the administration's agenda. In a stunning rebuke to his mentor, Arthur rejected Conkling's demands. As president, Arthur wished to establish himself as a leader free of machine politics. Civil service reform gained traction after the Garfield assassination, the result of the widespread impression that Guiteau acted solely because he did not receive the patronage post he desired. And Congress passed the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act in early 1883. The legislation called for the creation of a civil service commission and the institution of exams for certain government posts. Chester Arthur signed the bill into law on January 16th, thereby helping to dismantle the spoils system that he benefited from for so long. A year prior, the president approved another significant piece of legislation, the Chinese Exclusion Act, the first U.S. law that restricted immigration based on a race. It stemmed from anger among white Americans about labor competition with Chinese nationals who often worked for lower wages and were regarded by some as threats to American society. Its language also barred immigrants of Chinese ancestry from ever becoming U.S. citizens. The president vetoed an earlier version of the bill, which proposed a 20-year ban, but subsequently approved a 10-year embargo. The major laws that were passed during Arthur's administration originated in Congress, as the office of the presidency had lost much of its legislative influence during Andrew Johnson's tenure. So yeah, pretty bad stuff. And just to give you another little blip, the Chinese Exclusion Act was a United States federal law signed by President Chester A. Arthur on May 6th of 1882, it prohibiting all immigration of Chinese laborers. Building on the earlier Page Act of 1875, which banned Chinese women from immigrating to the United States, the Chinese Exclusion Act was the first and remains the only law to have been implemented to prevent all members of a specific ethnic or national group from immigrating to the United States. Yeah, it was bad. It was real bad. So you're going to see some images on the screen, some cartoons and such that were in newspapers and all that stuff back in the day during this time. But it was really bad. It was one of the worst things that we've ever done, in my opinion. It's just absurd. And the fact that Arthur basically pushed for this and signed it into law is just absolutely absurd. So not only did his presidency not spawn much of anything, it spawned this act, which was one of the just most despicable things that we've probably done. Obviously slavery being top of the list, and this is right up there on the list of just despicable things we've done as a nation. So, pretty bad stuff. So that is, just wanted to mention that, the Chinese Exclusion Act, Arthur did sign it into law. Look it up. Check it out. Probably will be shaking your head just like I am. Somebody mentioned this to me. I was mentioning to them I was recording my Arthur video, and this person said, you know what? You definitely should discuss the Chinese Exclusion Act. So big shout out. Thank you to that person. And there you go. I definitely wanted to add this little part in here. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. Bye-bye. And now to finish this off, of course, I'm going to read you about Chester Arthur's death. And then, of course, I'm going to show you pictures of his gravesite as well at the Albany Rural Cemetery there in Menands or however you pronounce it, right outside of Albany, New York. Only a year after Chester Arthur became president following the assassination of James Garfield, he was diagnosed with Bright's disease, a kidney condition that he knew would eventually prove fatal. Historians believe that it was largely due to his illness that he decided not to run for the presidency in 1884. After leaving the White House, he returned to his New York brownstone at 123 Lexington Avenue, located about 2 miles from Ulysses S. Grant's residence. Arthur resumed his law practice, but his illness kept him largely secluded, and in the teeming city, the former president soon became a forgotten man. So forgotten that when he died, an obituary published by the Corning Journal lamented, "The ex-president finished his career in declining health and obscurity at his home until his illness called attention to him again. His name had scarcely been mentioned since he left Washington." Almost immediately after leaving office, he began to show signs of his disease. Within about a year, he was confined to his bed. He drank milk with pepsin to help his digestion, and his formerly large girth had almost disappeared. Arthur began to prepare for the end when he wrote his will, leaving his property to his 2 children. His sisters Regina and Mary moved in to care for him, and by the summer of 1886, he showed signs of improvement. He left the city for his cottage in New London, Connecticut. When he returned to New York on September 27th, friends noted his thin and pallid appearance, but Arthur felt he was on the mend. In the ensuing days, he even accepted an offer to be president of the Arcade Railway Company. I did mention that earlier. And he took several carriage rides in the city. Several days later, he again felt ill. At first, he blamed the jostling rides in Central Park, but he soon realized his condition was more serious. He confined himself to his bedroom for a month, where he read books and newspapers and kept abreast of the upcoming municipal elections. Friends visited often and noticed his improved appearance, and by November, he felt better than he had in months. At 9 p.m. on Tuesday, November 16th, the 57-year-old Arthur was examined in his home by his family physician and good friend, Dr. George A. Peters. They chatted about a fishing trip they planned to take the following summer in Canada on the Restigouge River, and Peters gave Arthur a clean bill of health before he left for the evening. Unfortunately, what the doctor was unable to detect was an imminent stroke. That day, essentially his last of vibrant life, an unaware Arthur ate a big bowl of clams and did some paperwork. Reminiscent of James Buchanan, chesterarthur also made the peculiar request that his friend Jimmy Smith destroy many of his personal and presidential papers, denying this important historical documentation to future scholars. The next morning at 8 a.m., the housemaid entered the upstairs bedroom to rouse Arthur, but found him unresponsive. Alarmed, she called for Arthur's son, who immediately called Dr. Peters. The doctor rushed to the home and found that Arthur had suffered a stroke and his right side was paralyzed. He grimly declared that the former president's case was hopeless. William A. Valentine, a second doctor, arrived, as did several of Arthur's former law partners, including Judge Surrogate Rollins. Unable to speak and barely able to move, Arthur was still aware of his surroundings and could gently squeeze his doctor's hand and stick out his tongue when asked. His breathing fluctuated from once a second to long pauses with none taken. But he hung on that day and night into November 18th. In the early morning hours, Arthur blinked several times and turned his head on his pillow. Those were his last earthly movements, and at 4:30 a.m., he fell still. For chesterarthur, the end mercifully came at 5:10 a.m. on November 18th of 1886. By his bedside when he died were his son, Alan, his 2 sisters, Surrogate Rollins, and Dr. Valentine. Dr. Peters released a statement in which he said he had never known a more heroic patient. He went on to describe Arthur's final days. The attack that ended his life was not anticipated by him. I considered it as among the possibilities for such an attack is one of the ways in which the disease he had terminates. When the attack came, however, I believe he realized that it was fatal, and if I can judge from the expression of his face, I think he was gratified that he was to die so painlessly. He did not at any time suffer much actual pain. He could feel and see himself wasting. That was all. So that was it. The day that Arthur died, an undertaker, Mr. Davison, prepared the remains, but he did not embalm the former president. He dressed him in a black suit and frock coat and placed him in a cloth-covered oak casket with silver handles, upon which a silver plate read, Chester A. Arthur, born October 5th of 1830, died November 18th of 1886. So then there was, of course, a funeral and a long procession that had followed. And interestingly enough, not many people Sadly, really, but not surprisingly, there were no crowds along the 141-mile trip from New York City to where Albany is. Pretty interesting stuff. The only stop was in Poughkeepsie for water, the train ride that they took. It's pretty interesting. So he's buried, you're probably seeing on your screen, at the Albany Rural Cemetery in Albany, New York, or in Menands, New York. It's actually a really cool gravesite. It's got this, the big angel there. It's interesting. An 8-foot tall bronze winged angel is placed a few feet from the grave. The figure, now green with age, represents sorrow and holds a palm leaf in her left hand that stretches out over the coffin. The memorial is reached by climbing 5 granite steps. On the base is inscribed simply, Arthur. A plaque on the grave reads, Chester Alan Arthur, 21st President of the United States, born October 5th of 1830, died November 18th of 1886. Notably, the birth date is incorrect on both his grave and the plaque that was placed on his coffin. Arthur was actually born in 1829, but this is not a simple typo. Like President Obama almost 130 years later, Arthur's birthplace was obviously hotly disputed when he was the vice presidential candidate on the ticket with Garfield. So, interestingly enough, it was very interesting. So, there's a little fun fact. The death sites, of course, location of his death. It was actually at 123 Lexington Avenue in New York City. So pretty interesting there. That's actually also the home where he was first sworn in at. Same home that he died in. Some of these pictures you're probably seeing on your screen are pictures of his swearing in there and pictures of what that home now looks like. It's actually the building where Arthur died is now Calliston's, an Indian spice and specialty food store. It's been that way since 1944. So pretty interesting stuff. One last kind of thing here. Plans for the Albany Rural Cemetery began on April 2nd of 1841 when an association was formed to locate land for new burial grounds. 3 years later, on April 20th of 1844, the group purchased a scenic 100-acre plot about 3 miles north of Albany from Thomas Hill House. The picturesque, undulating parcel featured ponds, streams, rocky cliffs, and a forest. So it's pretty neat. It's a beautiful cemetery, the Albany Rural Cemetery. Arthur's gravesite is located on one of the highest knolls in the western end of the cemetery. He is buried beside his wife, his son, and his parents. And nearby is a memorial for his father-in-law, Captain Herndon, who was lost at sea in 1857 on the steamboat Central America. To the left of Arthur's grave is a flagpole. And outside of the cemetery gate is a marker erected in 1982 by the Cemetery Association and Historic Society. So, pretty cool stuff. It really is a very, very pretty gravesite. I must say, it's just kind of a cool-looking gravesite. Yeah, like I said, it's a really cool gravesite. It's nothing like overly spectacular, but the monument there with the angel, it's just neat. It's very striking. When you pull up to it in your car or if you're walking, it's definitely very noticeable. It's very, very striking. So I thought it was pretty cool. It's definitely it's not on the lower end of presidential grave sites. And like I said, the Albany Rural Cemetery is a pretty cool place. His sister, Mary, of course, who was the acting first lady, she's buried in the same cemetery. So cool place. There's other historical figures buried there. It's definitely a place to check out if you're in that Albany area. I definitely recommend it. So there you go. It's the life, the legacy, presidency, and death and gravesite of our 21st President of the United States, Chester Arthur. Right, Henry?
Yep, Chester Arthur.
That's right. And next week, we're going to take a look at the 22nd President of the United States. I'm going to try to quiz Henry. Who's the 22nd? Come on, he was the 22nd and 24th. Come on, he's the only guy from our home state of New Jersey. Think of a blue monster on Sesame Street.
Sesame.
Grover
Cleveland.
There you go. He got it. Grover Cleveland. That'll be next week. Our New Jersey native, Grover Cleveland. So that'll be fun for us. Also, I wanted to let everybody know that we will be releasing, Henry and I are working on it, a Lincoln assassination video. We are going to release that on April 14th. April 14th, I believe, is a Wednesday this year. So that week, we'll still be releasing our Thursday and Friday presidential video, of course. But that Wednesday, April 14th, we will release a Lincoln assassination video, just like we did for the John F. Kennedy assassination back in November.
Back in when we first started.
Yep, back when we first started. So Henry's going to help me out with the Lincoln assassination video. And I think I touched on this in the Lincoln videos. Wait till you see what's in store for this. Because I followed all of John Wilkes Booth's path, right?
Don't tell him.
Don't tell him, right?
It's so fast.
A lot of cool stuff to show you, though. So, right, we're excited about that?
Yes, I'm very excited to go see it, too.
Yes, of course. All right. Well, thanks for the subscribes, guys. Thanks for all the support. Leave those comments and questions below. If there's anything I messed up on or any questions or comments you have, leave them below. Right, Henry?
Yep, right here.
And thank you so very much. We will see you next week for Grover Cleveland. Thanks so much, guys.
Bye.
Bye-bye.